Well, I'm delighted to be with you. I won't claim any wisdom. It's fun to share some experiences of ministry, and I'll do that in the first part, and then happy to entertain thoughts and reflections and conversations. The first thing I would say is, how many of you are juniors, middlers, seniors? There's a schema that I recognize in seminary that, when you get there, it is so cool to be there. And aren't these the greatest people in the world? And by the end of your junior year, it's often like, oh my God, I got to get out of here. CPE, you come back and there's a bit of a reprieve, and it's nice to see everybody again. And then by the end of the middler year, it's often, who the heck are these people, and how can the church survive with them? But one of the things I've seen here at the Seminary of the Southwest, and I didn't experience it so much when I was at Nashotah House, but my wife and several people who've come on our staff from out of here, is there's a wonderful sense of community that does form here. And for those of you who are seniors, my experience has been many, when they graduate, find themselves really grieving that loss of community. One thing I'll offer to you that it took me a long time to figure out is I'd look around juniors, middlers, and seniors and see who might you want to be in a colleague group on an ongoing basis when you get out of this place. I'll talk a little bit about this later, but I'm in a colleague group with three that happen to be men that I started seminary with 30 years ago last fall. We didn't form this until about 8 years ago, but it is absolutely life-giving. A place where you can go in complete safety, get away. We get together twice a year in one of our places and hang out and eat and pray and cry and laugh. So I just commend that thought to you as you're looking around at your classmates. And it doesn't have to be all people from your class. We actually represent 3 different classes. I'm always hesitant to come to something like this because it seems to imply that I know something. And the further I go, the more I'm aware of what I don't know. And I presented first on your little handout this prayer from Thomas Merton, and if we don't mind, I'd like to pray again. I think it could be called the parish priest's prayer. Doug, I'll pass one over to you. I'm crazy about Merton, and I served in Kentucky for several years near his monastery at Gethsemane, which is an amazing place. So now I handed out all my sheets. There we are. Let us pray. My Lord God, I have no idea where I'm going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end. Nor do I really know myself, and the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I'm actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you, and I hope I have that desire in all that I'm doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire, and I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I know nothing about it. Therefore I will trust you always, though I may seem to be lost, and even in the shadow of death. I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face perils alone. Amen. I love that prayer. It's something I keep under my blotter on my desk to pray regularly. What we do is, I got to tell you, I've been doing this for 28 years. What we do is absolutely glorious. Day by day to be with people, the people of God, who want to come and talk about their joys, their sorrows, about wanting to grow in their faith. All that stuff that brought you here, it's out there. And it's really great. I also, I preached Eric Hungerford's ordination. Some of you know Eric a while back. And I said, Eric, what we do is glorious. And it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. And the two kind of go together. So I just encourage you all to believe and keep the hopes and prayers that you came with. Now, I seem to be either out of order here. This may really be interesting. First, I'll tell you a little of my path in ministry. I mean, when you're in seminary, you're thinking, where might I end up or where might I head? My first sense of call to ministry came after I attended a Cursillo in 1979. Some of us remember Cursillo. I think it was a fine movement for its time. Most of the places that I've seen it, it never moved out of the 70s, and we can put it to rest now. But it was on that Cursillo weekend that I, having been raised loosely Christian, and I said I would have called myself a Christian and put Jesus over with Santa Claus and Easter Bunny and seen no discrepancy with that at all, which is, I think, where many people who come to the church are. I had an experience of Christ and knew in one weekend that I had to commit my life to Christ, go to seminary and be a priest, or join the church and go to seminary and be a priest. And the person who I was doing this, they had to set apart a time for confession, as we used to call it. I don't like that name. Sacrament of Reconciliation is better. The priest to whom I offered all this looked at me and he said, let's give this some time. But this was back when, and Doug can tell you, the process towards ordination was a lot simpler back then. And I ended up going back to this man who was my parents' rector in Wisconsin while I lived in St. Louis. And I said, well, I'm back. It's a year and a half later, and I think I'm called to seminary. And he said, okay, I'll send you to seminary. And I said, what about the committees and the bishop and everything? He says, no problem, it's done. Now, that's not the experience that most of you have probably had. We do things a little differently now. So I went to Nashotah House, having come into the Episcopal Church in a parish that was charismatic, literalist, and really verging on Pentecostal. And I tried to go to seminary from the Diocese of Missouri where I was living, and the Bishop of Missouri told me at that time that we're only sending women because women's ordination was a new thing. It's the only time in my white male life that I've been discriminated against I didn't even notice. So I did go back up to Wisconsin where my parents, my hometown, and where my parents had come into the church prior to me and the rector there. And I ended up in Nashotah House because in the Diocese of Milwaukee at that time, in what we used to call the Beretta belt, that was, Beretta's that funny three-corner hat that Anglo-Catholic and Roman Catholic priests used to wear. That was the only seminary that was offered. At the time, it was great, and Nashotah has kind of a negative connotation then and now in some people's minds. Women were not really welcomed, and there were only, I think, one woman student out of 40 at that time. But the faculty were very open to women's ordination. It was great formation, and I got to go from having encountered the kind of charismatic evangelical in the Episcopal Church to the more Catholic side, which was a great exposure. After that, I moved to Madison, Wisconsin, where I served as an assistant in a parish, a downtown parish on the Capitol Square, not unlike St. David's here in Austin. I was there for 2.5 years and went to a dairy farming community outside of Milwaukee of about 10,000 people. We were there for 4 years, had a lovely experience. And then for the first time in my ordained ministry, the Spirit really spoke. And we left that place sooner than I might have thought to go in, and I became the vicar of 2 inner city missions in Milwaukee. One was a largely black congregation, and we ended up building a new church and community center on the 3rd highest crime corner in the city. The other was in an old Polish neighborhood that had become largely Hispanic. They were both sites of the largest feeding program in the Diocese of Milwaukee, and I was the urban missionary and vicar of those 2 missions. I would say that I'd been a priest for 5 years at that point, and I hadn't really believed it in my head. You know how you kind of got to get used to an idea? There, I think I began to grasp that I was a priest, and it's also there, I would say, in the 6 years I spent in urban ministry that I became a minister. I also developed what has shaped the ministry that I've tried to offer to the church of a real love for the poor and the disenfranchised, a group of people that really frightened me when I first started. From there, I was called to Lexington, Kentucky, to a 50-year-old suburban parish just off the University of Kentucky campus. Was there for 7 years. And then, as many of you know, my wife Kathy had been wrestling with her sense of vocation, and we thought that we would move near Virginia Seminary. No offense, Doug, but I thought I'd look for a job as an assistant somewhere so that she could finish her studies. And at that time, my name had been put in at St. David's here in Austin. How many of you ever thought, living in Texas? You know, never been on our radar screen. But there was a really great search process, and I was called here, and obviously there's a seminary here, and Kathy commenced her studies and has now been ordained for 5 years. What I'll brag about on that is it was the best search process I've ever seen. They were absolutely honest. This committee met once a week for over a year, and when they stopped meeting and disbanded because they'd accomplished their task, they wept at losing that sense of community. I wish that all search processes were like that. So that's a little bit about my path here. I've been at St. David's for 9 years. I am, at Doug's invitation, this is a piecing off of a presentation I did make at the Gathering of Leaders a couple of months ago. The topic, the Gathering of Leaders is a leadership group for young clergy. They invite a few of us old-timers to be there. And the topic of this year's meetings is hope-full, fear-less leadership. And they asked me to make a short presentation at that meeting, and it was really lovely because fear is one of my best things. I am really good at it. And I could incorporate that in. You may notice I've lost the first page of my notes, so this will be kind of fun as we go forward. So in making this presentation, I didn't start so much with things that we've done, and I'll get to that today here, that express leadership at St. David's. I really felt called to reflect on my experience as a priest of leadership, which is not the take you would get from everyone. We all have a different take. And I'm not saying that I live into all of these things. I opened with that prayer by Thomas Merton because I love the humility that it expresses. And again, I don't say that I live into this, but I don't think there's any deeper quality that a priest can develop than humility. I think it's straight out of the gospel. And I think that that's the foundation for what we do when we do it well. And so I started out talking about that with paying attention to ourselves and our own health and our own issues. Because to me, leadership is going to come out of that. I have done this well, and I've done it poorly. I've had times when I wasn't sure that I could or wanted to continue. Just about lost my marriage at one part. I had help with that, believe me. Kathy and I did that together. And some of these things are things I've learned about being healthy in all of my vocations. So I'll launch into that. I did pass out a sheet with some outline on it. The first is spiritual. We all need to have a spiritual director. If we're going to be priests, that's got to be there. I talk with people a lot, and I try not to be in a didactic position, but a lot of times somebody will say, oh yeah, me and my friends, we get together and we talk about this. That's not spiritual direction. And I don't believe that we can be good leaders after the model of Christ as priests in the church if we're not working with somebody who is trained and has the ability to lead us and call us on things. The same goes, I believe, and not everyone agrees with this, is for emotional self-care. I'll go so far as to say that every priest ought to be in therapy all the time. They say that about therapists. They say that because what they get coming in at them is bigger than they are. The world is bigger than we are. We need help with that. And there's that saying, maybe you've heard it, if the shepherd isn't fed and cared for, the shepherd will eat the sheep. We've all got stuff that will come out in negative ways if we don't take care of it. And so I encourage all of us to do our own work. There's a book that I was asked to send some books out to you, and I put them in here. One that I've enjoyed recently that has really helped me in my own, being in touch with my own issues, is by Brene Brown. Is that a name that's familiar to you? Yes. She's a psychologist. She's actually an Episcopalian, I understand, a member of the cathedral in Houston. She's written a number of great books, and if you Google her online, you can find some presentations and things she's made. She wrote a book called The Gifts of Imperfection. The subtitle is Let Go of Who You Think You're Supposed to Be and Embrace Who You Are. That's been one of the best things I've read in the last 3 to 5 years in being in touch with myself. It also, I think, when I'm doing that kind of good reading, you can share what you're doing with other people because you know what the book or the resource says. I hold that up to you along with the idea of self-care and being in touch with yourself. Third area is mentoring. This can be difficult for us as we're the ones to whom others look. And I don't know if Doug had this experience. You probably will at some point. You're a priest for a while, you're doing things, and you finally think one day, man, I have got to find somebody who's seen it all and done it all that I can talk to about this. And you look around and realize you're it. It doesn't take long to get that kind of experience. I have had some really great experience with mentoring. Bishop Payne, some of you know, is a twice removed bishop of this diocese. Claude Payne is an incredible visionary. When I moved here and I met him, I said, could I come up and see you every so often? And when he was living in Salado, I tried to go up every 3 or 4 months just to sit down and take him out to lunch, just to hear what vision is. Might only walk away with one thing, might walk away with nothing, but it was exposure. Another one is I serve on the board of St. David's Hospital Foundation, which is the nonprofit part of St. David's in town. The guy that runs that board, the CEO of St. David's Foundation, Earl Maxwell, is an accountant by training. But he really knows how to organize a shop. And I get together with Earl periodically to just talk about leadership and how does he do this, and to also tap his brain. There's many things in the quote-unquote secular world that we can steal. What do they do for employee performance reviews? How does he structure this or that? I mentioned that I have my colleague group of the guys I was in seminary with that I get together with. That's invaluable to me. I also, and as you go through the church, you may be invited to be a part of other groups. I'm in another colleague group of rectors of large downtown parishes in the South. Being together with people that share common experience. No parish is just like yours, but other parishes have similarities, and you can gain from them, and they're also good friends. There's a last group I formed. I call it my Magi group. At St. David's, there are some very wise people who are mature, older than I am. They don't have to be older, but these three happen to be. Of a former dean of the seminary, a general convention deputy who was a general convention deputy 8 times and served on the staff at 815, and a former seminary faculty member. I call them my Magi's, the three of them. And we try to get together every week or month or 6 weeks. They're part of the parish, and I ask them, what do you see? What do you see in the parish? What do you see in me? And when I have a challenge or a difficulty, with assured confidence, I can run an idea past them. Not infrequently, I'll run an idea past them, and one of them will say, that is absolutely crazy. But sometimes they'll give me good advice on something I'm thinking about that I may modify in a different way. Continue education. Up until 4, 5, 6 years ago, there was no requirement in the church for continuing education. Now General Convention has said that we should do it. But that's akin to the canon saying that we should do premarital work. It says do it, but doesn't tell you how. I encourage you to take that seriously. Look at areas where you might feel that you have a weakness. Don't always go to the area that you like best. I love liturgy. I could go to liturgy workshops forever. They're not going to help me grow in some of my areas where my growing edges are. In recent years, being the rector of a very large church, and I didn't get to say when I told you about where I'd been, I never dreamed I'd be the rector of a parish that's one of the 25 largest in the country. I'm not sure I'm up for that job many days, but it seems to be where God has put me, and it's a gas. But most of the continuing education I've done over the last 9 years has been in the area of leadership, especially leadership that's not just from the church, again, outside of the church venue. I put down on the sheet that I passed out to you some continuing education, reading, research. I'll get back to where I was going there. The first one I listed was The Velvet Elvis. Anybody read any Rob Bell? He's different than I am. That means I want to read him. As I read him, I find there's a lot of similarities in the things that I find that I struggle with in the church and the things he's addressing. Second one I put there is It's Not About the Coffee by Howard Behar. Anybody seen this book in Starbucks? They came out with it a while back. I don't think it's a great seller, but I downloaded it for $4 and I listened to it on my MP3 player. This is a guy who was with Starbucks when they decided to go international, and he's talking about leadership principles. No, he's full of himself. I guess I'm being taped on that. I hope he doesn't watch this. Not all of it applies, but many of the things that he has to say have some application. One of the things he said that really, if I get nothing else out of this book, he said our problem was that we thought we were a coffee company. What we are is a people company in the coffee business. I think too often we think that we're a church business.
Here's your first page.
Oh, there's my first page. Well, I'm done with it now, Doug. Thank you.
Okay. I'm trying to remember what my page didn't match your page.
Yeah. I encourage you to look at leadership resources from other areas. I'm picking up some fun stuff out of this and also learning that my folly isn't as bad as some other people's. I mentioned the Alban Institute. It is worth the cost, I believe, of the annual membership. I think it's $25 or $50. You get a weekly newsletter, and I often share that with our vestry or the people on our staff. I've also attended several conferences with them. Now, the three things that I listed there have to do with large parishes, because I happen to be in a large parish at this time. One was Wrestling the Gorilla with Roy Oswald, and the gorilla being the large parish. And it's talking about management styles and that kind of thing. It was there that I got the idea from Roy Oswald of forming this colleague group with my seminary friends. Second one is governance and ministry. It sounds dry as dirt, it wasn't quite that dry, but Dan Hotchkiss really knows his stuff. It was also interesting, this was a conference that was largely not Episcopalians. And again, I know I'm being recorded. I will say, I am glad I'm not like that other man or woman. I love our polity, and we escape from a lot of problems that some others run into. Again, I don't take everything in his book, but there were a number of pieces there that I could make use of or modify. And finally, if any of you end up in a very large congregation, Susan Beaumont has done some wonderful work. This book, Inside the Large Congregation, is exploring what she describes as a new phenomenon among major denominations, mainline denominations of the very large church. And she actually, in the 80s, who came up with the schema of the pastoral family program and resource? I'm blanking. Might have been Alan Rothage. She's taken that 2 generations further, and particularly taken the what we call the resource church. I'm glad we got rid of the term corporate church, and has broken down that into 3 categories. And she's got some wonderful charts out about the challenges for assimilation, for a senior pastor, for staff, for board or vestry, that compares those 3. And I'll share with you that St. David's has been in the middle section, leaning towards the largest section since before I came. And just like the change from being a parish with a 200 average attendance to going above that, there are some things inherent that are obstacles, which we've been intentionally trying to work on to move into what she calls that strategic level of parish. On the macro level, I don't know why I called it that, but it seemed good to me. Kind of just stepping back and looking at how you are and who you are as priest, who we are. You got to do your prayers. That's the easiest thing to put aside. And I don't know how we do this, and I've tried to do it without doing my prayers, and it gets pretty dry. I would also put in there, love your people. Slow down, do your prayers, and find a way to love your people. I have a friend who, he's still in ministry, but he has some struggles. But at one point he realized his struggle, and when you get up in his pulpit, there's a sign. It simply says, "They are not the enemy." He felt that he needed to be reminded of that when he got up to preach. I think if you probably all know this, so forgive me, I don't mean to act like an expert. If you look at the people in any congregation and take time to pray with them and pray for them, I think you can find that you will love them dearly. I had an experience about 4 years ago with 2 people who were graduates of this seminary that I was still in touch with as they were in their first year of ministry. And both of them in the same week contacted me in about February, the year after they graduated, and said with astonishment, "I can't believe how much I love these people." That's a great place from which to do ministry. And they will irritate the heck out of you. But they are very lovable. And they are God's people. I made a note here to talk about some of the struggles people go through. It says, remember, you are being taped, so don't reveal any names. I've been betrayed by some very dear friends in ministry, but it's taught me a lot. One of my best friends got involved with the wife of a parishioner and had to leave ministry. We were meeting regularly through this whole thing, and he didn't feel like he could share about that. I'd like to think I could have helped if he'd have been open enough. I do want to encourage you, if you find yourself in some behavior that's not right, you know it's not right, tell somebody. Find somebody to talk to. I know that bishops and diocesan structures don't always seem safe. Seek out a trusted colleague. I've had too many friends crash and burn in ministry when they didn't need to. What we do is glorious, but it also is very hard. It can be very lonely at times. And for those of us in relationships, we're trying to balance the vocation of being a Christian, of being in relationship and priesthood. It's really hard. We need help. If you find that you're walking to an edge, ask for help. Because I've just seen so many people I love who are great ministers not ask for help and convince themselves that what they were doing was okay, and they end up damaging their life, the life of those who love them, and the life of their community. We just need to not risk that. Going to building relationships with leadership. a solid relationship covers a lot of miscues on our part. In a little while, I'll talk about some of the creative things we've done at St. David's. I have really made some people mad sometimes. But my senior warden last year was a very dear friend with whom I didn't agree on a lot of things, and that was really good. And when we had a couple of those things come up last year, he said, "You have strength of relationship that you can make this okay if you'll just go talk to people. Never write anybody off. Everybody belongs to God. And if we work at our relationships, we can avoid an awful lot of trouble." One of the techniques that I use is when I have that person who irritates me the most, I physically put them at the top of my prayer list. And it makes a difference. Now people say, what does prayer do? I don't know if it changes them, but it changes me. And I also found to be willing to acknowledge when I'm wrong, or even if I'm not completely wrong, take the first step. In real estate, a mantra is location, location, location. I would suggest that a mantra for us is communicate, communicate, communicate. I've found out the hard way that parishes don't like to be surprised, vestries don't like to be surprised, wardens don't like to be surprised, and no surprise, bishops do not like to be surprised. So communicating what we're doing, what we're thinking of with people is really helpful. One thing that I find is I'll have an idea that I'm thinking about for months. Doug, I'm sure you found this too. I have thought through this, I've been all around it, I've got it all worked out. When I present it to you for the first time, it's the first time you've heard it. And if I've got it all set in my mind, I'm surprised or even threatened because you haven't had time to work through that and you're asking questions that I've already dealt with. So communicating up front, being careful not to think out loud too much, and when presenting an idea, recognize this is a brand new idea to somebody. And remember what it was like when I first conceived of it. One thing I found at St. David's, and believe me, as good as the seminary does, the thing that priests often say to each other is, we never talked about that in seminary. You're going to face a lot of stuff that you haven't encountered before. One of my big challenges at St. David's is having 83 people on the payroll. I was not trained in human resources or management. That's why I've done some continuing education in that area. Although it is sometimes discomforting, I found it very helpful to bring people on staff who are not like me, to bring people on staff who will disagree with me. And I have had, in fact, frequently my staff, people will look at me, I'll come up with an idea, and they'll tell me that's absolutely crazy, and often they're right. Recently I caught myself, some of you know, well, I probably shouldn't use names, but a graduate of this seminary recently in a staff meeting brought up an idea, and I found myself saying, no, we can't do that, and moving on to something else. And a few minutes later, something was niggling at my mind that reminded me, I've been a company man for so long, I tend to just think within the box. I said, let's stop and go back to this. It was an idea worth merit, that it was out of the box. And so my first response was, we can't do that. And it actually was an idea that was great that we implemented that almost got set aside. So I would encourage you to have people around you who disagree with you and who will call you when they find that you're being, often for me it's when I'm being fearful. The same is true with selecting wardens. You put people around you who will disagree.